If you ask the center of our planet, how old is the Earth? It would give you an answer that is about 2.5 years less than the answer you'd get from us living up here on the surface. Right now, as you're watching this, your head is aging faster than your feet. Not by much, just about 90 billionths of a second over an average human lifetime. This is a fundamental consequence of gravity. Gravity causes time to pass more slowly, an effect known as gravitational time dilation. The stronger the gravitational pull, the slower time moves compared to regions with weaker gravity. No single clock in the universe is more correct than any other, because time is relative. To put it simply, God doesn't know what time it is. But time clearly feels like a tangible thing, right? It flows continuously. It has a strict direction from the past, through the present, and into the future. For example, in Hindu mythology, the river of the cosmos is portrayed with the sacred image of Shiva dancing. His dance supports the coursing of the universe, and it is itself the flowing of time. What could be more universal and obvious than this flowing? Well, let's see about that. In 1971, two physicists, Joseph Hafele and Richard Keating, set out to prove that time is not absolute. In this experiment, they used 4 precise atomic clocks. 2 carried aboard commercial aircraft, and 2 remaining on the ground. They placed these clocks on commercial flights, sending one eastward and the other westward. After the planes returned, they compared the traveling clocks to the ones that stayed behind on the ground. The goal was to see if the flying clocks had experienced time differently, in accordance with the predictions of special relativity. The results of the experiment were exactly what Einstein predicted. The clocks on the planes really did tick slower than the ones left behind. The differences were minimal, but they were consistent with the predictions of special relativity. The eastbound clocks, flying with the Earth's rotation, lost about 59 nanoseconds. The westbound clocks, flying against the rotation, gained about 273 nanoseconds compared to the stationary ground clocks. This empirically demonstrated that time can vary depending on relative velocity, thus confirming a fundamental aspect of Einstein's relativity. Perhaps the most surprising part is that Einstein understood this effect a full century before clocks were precise enough to measure it. He simply asked himself a question we have all wondered about: gravity. How did the sun and the earth attract each other without touching and without any physical connection between them? He imagined that the sun and the earth do not attract each other directly, but rather that each of the two gradually acts on what is between them. And since what lies between them is only space and time, he imagined that they each modified the space and time that surrounded them, just as a body immersed in water displaces the water around it. This modification of the structure of time influences the movement of bodies, causing them to fall toward each other. A mass slows down time around itself. The Earth is a large mass, and it slows down time in its vicinity. Things fall down simply because time is slowed by the Earth. This means time loses its most fundamental property, which is its unity. If a clock down in a valley and a clock up on a mountain are ticking at totally different speeds, which one is right? The truth is, the question itself is meaningless. Think of it like stepping onto a bathroom scale here on Earth and then taking that exact same scale to the moon. Which number is your true weight? Neither one is the absolute truth. Weight isn't a fixed universal property. It changes depending on the gravitational pull of where you happen to be standing. Time works exactly the same way. There is no single absolute master clock ticking away in the background of the universe. Out of all of the equations describing our universe, the direction of time only appears in one. Not in Newton's laws governing mechanics, not in Maxwell's equations for electromagnetism, not in Einstein's gravity, and not in Schrödinger's quantum mechanics. So where does the arrow of time come from? It all began with a regicide. On January 16th, 1793, a revolutionary named Lazare Carnot voted to sentence King Louis XVI to death. Carnot had a deep passion for the Persian poet Sadi Shirazi, and he named his first son after him. Sadi Carnot grew up with a fascination for the steam engines that were beginning to transform the world. In 1824, he wrote a pamphlet called Reflections on the Motive Power of Fire, attempting to understand how these machines worked. While he mistakenly thought heat was a physical fluid, he did realize the most important detail. He figured out that steam engines only work because heat always flows from hot to cold. A Prussian professor named Rudolf Clausius read this and formulated a law that heat cannot pass from a cold body to a hot one. This is the second law of thermodynamics. This is the only basic law of physics that distinguishes the past from the future. Clausius introduced a quantity to measure this irreversible progress of heat and named it entropy, from the ancient Greek word for transformation. He denoted it with the letter S. The equation states that delta S is always greater than or equal to 0. Heat passes only from hot bodies to cold bodies, never the other way around. But what actually is heat? The answer was revealed by an Austrian physicist named Ludwig Boltzmann. Boltzmann understood that heat is not a substance or a fluid. It is the microscopic agitation of molecules. Hot tea is tea where the molecules are highly agitated. Cold tea has molecules that are less agitated. Think of thermal agitation like constantly shuffling a deck of cards. Shuffling it only creates disorder. That is exactly why heat flows from hot to cold and never the other way around. It is driven purely by this continuous shuffling, the natural tendency of everything to become disordered. The growth of entropy is nothing other than this natural increase of disorder. Boltzmann proved that entropy is a direct result of our blurred vision of the world. It is simply the quantity that counts how many microscopic details we cannot see. If we had the power to observe the exact microscopic state of everything, the difference between the past and the future would vanish. Our entire perception of time passing depends on the simple fact that we cannot comprehend the world in all its tiny details. It is an illusion produced by our own myopia. We are stumbling through a blurry reality, and it is within that blur that we experience the flowing of time. But here is the most important part. The second law of thermodynamics is emergent. It simply does not exist at the most fundamental levels of reality. This suggests that the direction of time isn't built into the universe, but rather emerges from how things behave. Okay, the forward direction of time is an illusion, but I still feel something. But as we are about to see, even our shared sense of the present is about to vanish. 10 years before Einstein figured out that gravity slows down time, he discovered that speed does the same thing. This is what the hafele-keating experiment proved so elegantly. Because speed and mass both alter the flow of time locally, it completely destroys our concept of now. Imagine you have a sister and she has traveled to Proxima b, a planet orbiting a star about 4 light years away from Earth. You look up at the night sky and you ask yourself, what is my sister doing right now? If you look at her through an impossibly powerful telescope, you are capturing light that took 4 years to reach you. So you are not seeing what she's doing now, you are seeing what she was doing 4 years ago. You might try to calculate it and assume her now is simply 4 years after the image you are seeing. But that does not work either. Because in her time, she might have already gotten back on her spaceship, returned to Earth, and landed 10 years in your future, and now cannot be in the future. What if she took a calendar with her 10 years ago? Could we agree that now for her is when that calendar says a decade has passed? No, because she could return to Earth having experienced exactly 10 years, only to find that 20 years have passed for everyone else. So when the hell is now on Proxima b? The truth is, we have to stop asking the question. The concept of the present is something that only applies to things that are close to us. Our present does not extend across the universe. Because light takes time to travel and because time flows differently depending on where you are, there is no shared moment across the cosmos. Instead of a single universal past, present, and future, the universe is structured like a family tree. Every event has a past cone of things that came before it, and a future cone of things that will follow. The expanded present is simply the set of events that are neither past nor future. Just like you have relatives who are neither your ancestors nor your descendants. Reality is entirely made up of these overlapping light cones. For centuries, we did not even consider time to be an independent entity. The word time itself originates from an Indo-European root meaning to divide. Throughout most of human history, an hour was actually longer in the summer and shorter in the winter. This is because the 12-hour system simply divided the sunlight from dawn to sunset. Sundials and water clocks existed, but they did not run our schedules. It wasn't until the 14th century in Europe that towns started building bell towers with mechanical clocks to regulate collective activities. Even then, clocks didn't match. Every town had its own local time based on when the sun hit its highest point. It wasn't until the 19th century when the telegraph and fast trains were invented that we actually needed to synchronize clocks between cities. In 1883, a compromise was reached to divide the world into time zones, standardizing local time just to fix train schedules. Before this modern obsession with mechanical clocks, Aristotle had defined time simply as the measurement of change. Aristotle argued that if absolutely nothing changed and nothing moved, time would cease to exist. Time is just the measurement of change. But then along came Isaac Newton with the exact opposite idea. He argued that time passes regardless of what happens in the universe. Even if the entire cosmos froze completely still, Newton believed this invisible universal clock would just keep ticking. But Newton's absolute time does not actually exist. To find the truth, Einstein synthesized the ideas of both Aristotle and Newton. He proved Newton was partially right. There is a container, a canvas that exists even if there is no matter. But Aristotle was also right. This canvas is not absolute, and it physically interacts with everything inside it. This canvas is the gravitational field. Space and time are not an empty stage for the universe. They are part of the show. Space-time is a physical substance, much like the electromagnetic field that creates light, or the fields that make up matter. It stretches, flexes, and pushes against everything else. So when time slows down near a mountain or a black hole, it happens because there is less gravitational field there. Just when we thought we had it all figured out with Einstein's flexible space-time, quantum mechanics came along and demolished the rest of the scaffolding. If space-time is a physical field like everything else, then it must obey the laws of quantum mechanics. And those rules introduces three devastating facts: granularity, indeterminacy, and relationality. First, we have granularity. Time is not continuous, nor does it flow like a smooth stream. It is actually pixelated. There is a fundamental minimum scale to reality known as the Planck scale. The smallest possible interval is the Planck time, which is 10 to the negative 44 seconds. Below this, the entire concept of time simply ceases to exist. Second is indeterminacy. In quantum mechanics, an electron does not have a precise position until it interacts with something. It just exists in a smeared out cloud of probability known as a superposition. Because space-time is a physical substance, it fluctuates in the exact same way. It exists in a blurred superposition of many different configurations. This causes the rigid distinction between past, present, and future to fluctuate. In this state, an event might literally take place both before and after another one. And finally, we have relationality, which is perhaps the most radical discovery of them all. When an electron hits a TV screen, its probability cloud collapses and it materializes at a precise point. But here is the catch. It only becomes concrete in relation to that specific screen. To the rest of the universe, that electron and the screen are now bound together in a new, even larger cloud of probability. When you combine granularity, indeterminacy, and relationality, the ultimate illusion of time is revealed. This means there is no continuous timeline governing the cosmos. Instead, time is a stuttering, blurry web of probabilities that only flashes into existence during specific interactions. Down at the quantum level, the clock simply stops. Time passes at different according to place and speed. It is not directional. The arrow of time is a contingent illusion of our blurred vision. The present does not exist across the universe, and time is not an independent entity. Time is not real. If time is just a distortion created by our blurred vision, what does the universe look like in perfect focus? Subscribe and stay tuned for part 2 of this video, where we step into a world without time and discover what reality is actually made of. Thanks for watching. Until next time.